Welcome back to another episode of Christian Natural Health. Today, I'm very pleased to have Steve Gray with us. Steve is a three-time Emmy Award-winning writer, songwriter, and recording artist whose creativity and purpose have touched countless lives. Known for his dynamic leadership and ministry, he led the historic Smithton Outpouring, or the Cornfield Revival, and the Kansas City Revival, which was broadcast live worldwide every Friday night for 3.5 years. His influence sparked revival outpourings in hundreds of churches across the globe, transforming lives and communities. With degrees in instrumental and vocal music, a doctorate in theology, and Missouri Lifetime Teaching Certificate, Steve combines artistry, scholarship, and a passion for faith. As the founding pastor of Revive Church in Kansas City, he continues to inspire through his ministry. Married to Kathy for 50 years, Steve is also a proud father and grandfather, leaving a legacy of creativity, faith, and revival for generations to come. Welcome, Steve. That's quite an eclectic resume.
Yeah, I've got to do just about everything I ever wanted to do, and I'm still doing it. I'm still
Yeah,
in songwriting and preaching and traveling, and got
yeah.
to make one movie, and and got to do lots of TV and lots of awards. So,
Oh,
but
awesome. Yeah,
yeah, but my main focus is people, really, just
right.
helping people, and I love to see people transformed and changed. I have a idea that the problem we have is we have great churches and good churches, but the idea was that's the place you go to really connect with God, and not so much just about friends or home groups or volleyball teams. Those are fine, but right now, I feel like we need. And you mentioned revival and the Cornfield Revival, and I that's such a story. It's the story's being written about now, this many years later, more than it was when it well, there were short articles then, but now people are digging in. What happened? Tell
Right.
us again, because the
Yeah.
town was, and of course it's revival, and we need to know what revival is, and we need to know, why do I need it? What
Yeah.
will it do for me? And
Sure.
that's the transforming power of God, and it's an encounter with God that is beyond us.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I found myself, and I'll just start telling stories to you.
Please, please.
I
Yes.
found myself after many number of years in the ministry going the wrong direction. The church was doing great. I wasn't doing so great. And the reason being is it was a small town. We ended up starting this church in a town of 532 people. Now, we had a fairly decent traveling ministry before and recording then. And when I began to feel that God was going to start stirring and doing things in certain places around the world, I knew I would probably miss it because I'm on a bus traveling somewhere.
Mhm.
And so we started thinking about settling down, pastoring, doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so since we were traveling and known, we got offered a great church in Chicago to join their staff and to be raised up to be the senior pastor someday. And they had 800 or 900 people already, and it was beautiful. And they're building a shopping mall by it, and it was a new.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so when they found out we were available, they gave us the job. And so we took it in Chicago, and we got a house. We never got to move into it. That's part of the story. But we picked out a house, and they gave us the car allowance and all the. And it was more money than we'd ever had, and so we accepted. But anyway, we lived in this little town of 532 people because our home, which was 12 miles away from this little town, got hit by a tornado, an F4 tornado.
Oh,
And I
wow.
was in it. I can tell you a story about how being lifted up off the floor, but
Oh,
our house did not get blown away. Like this is if you took the old Southern style mansions, and they were big box houses, big, three
mhm.
stories, huge, just completely gone in seconds. But
Oh,
I was in a brick one, so it shifted off its foundation, so we couldn't live there anymore. It got condemned, and
yes.
so 500 houses gone. Everybody's looking for a place to live, and so we knew some people who said, "There's a house in this little town, and it just finished being built." And they'd love to have young couples move out there, and so that's how we ended up in a town of 532. It
Oh,
was a
wow.
nice place to park a bus and not be bothered,
Sure.
after you
I'd
traveled
imagine.
all over and
Yeah.
flown all over.
Right.
And so now the years passed, and we do that, and now Chicago offers us this job, and I take it. And in this town was this country church at the end of town. Didn't even know it was there. I'd lived there like a number of years and didn't even know it was there in that small a town.
Oh, wow.
And it's a historical site. 1859 it was built, and it has the same floorboards that they had during the Civil War. They came and parked their horses outside and went in and prayed.
Oh,
And
Wow.
and they laid on that floor, and I left the floor there. Of course, it was new
Cool.
carpeting, but
But yeah, I hope.
but
Yeah,
it was the
sure.
same planks, and so they were concerned it was going to be torn down. They didn't care it was a church. It had been locked up for 4 years. There's no people, no money, nobody to take care of it. Couldn't even cut the grass. Had one trustee that couldn't cut the grass anymore. And so it's going to be torn down. So
Mhm.
they appealed to me, said, we don't want to lose our historical site. We don't care about church. Would
Yeah.
you take it and be our pastor? And I said, well, you don't have any people, so that's not going to work. So
Yeah.
I said no. And then they came a second time. I said, no, we're going to Chicago. Then they came a third time and said, listen, we're desperate. Nobody wants this church. Nobody wants it. I can't get anybody to do anything with it, this little group. And in Chicago, they had like 21 other lineups that would couples that would love to have that job. We just had it first.
Right.
And so, but here's, they said, nobody wants it. It's going to be torn down. I'm going to Chicago by, and as I went out the door, I said, okay. I'll at least pray about it. I'll try
Right.
to do the respectable thing. So I only
Sure.
lived, town's so small, I only lived about a minute and a half away from them. So I drove that minute and a half. I felt like I should pray. And I went into the house and, Kathy's packing. She's off boxes and stuff. So I didn't even bother her because I thought this is such an obvious thing.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so I started praying. I laid out. So the Church of Chicago has all this money and the people, and there's a future, and we could do in the city, and it's a big, and all. And they said, and then there's this little church here. It's been closed for 4 years. It has no people, no money, and we're out of money too because we spent all our money kind of finding our way, seeking God. And we're out of money. The church has no money. The church has no people. It's locked up 4 years. It's got dead birds and animals inside that got in, and they're laying
Wow.
there like that. And so I said, so okay, Jesus, what would you do? And I thought answer would be obvious because it was obvious to the natural mind. And
Sure.
it's one of those rare, I'd say rare, being in ministry as many years as I have, that you hear a real distinct thing from heaven as opposed to I think God told me
Right.
I'll kind of
Right.
walk it out.
Sure.
But this was like and I'm there in the living room, and so I said, so Jesus, what would you do? And I heard from heaven. This is what I heard. I'll tell you what I would do. I would raise the dead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
and I was oh wow and too. And it just I felt like did all the blood just leave my leave my head and I'm going to pass out? Because I don't know how to answer that because you would, wouldn't you? You
Right.
would. And now would I?
Yeah.
And so I said, yes, I will do what you want me to. I want to, it's not even like I'm being ordered. It's like, I felt like I can go to Chicago and he'll still love me and I'll do okay.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
there's another path that's waiting. It's almost like in the kitchen with Martha or at the feet of Jesus. I love both of you, but which are you going to choose? And
Right.
so I thought, well, all my life and spiritual life, at least, I felt like I would try to do what Jesus would do. And so anyway, I almost passed out. I think like, what?
I'm
It was
sure.
such a word, like it's a life-changing moment. And so I went in and told Kathy, and she's a great woman of faith. She said, okay, if that, I get it. So we had to call Chicago, and it was an awkward call because they kept saying, well, is it money? Did somebody offer you more money? We could deal here. And I said,
Sure.
no, it's not money. I didn't tell them there was no money, but I, so
Sure.
back in there. So that's how we ended up saying, okay, well, let's open it up and go. And immediately, my first sermon, well, actually started on a Thursday night, making it as hard for God as I could to
Hmm.
nobody comes to church anyway.
Right.
But I started preaching revival coming to certain places around the world early. And it had no people, 13 people the first service, I think.
Yeah.
But I started preaching that, and I would stand on those in this church and say, I want you to imagine people lined up around the block, around the church, just to get in this building because the glory of God, not the music, we need that, not the preaching, we need that,
Sure.
but God is really in attendance to a
Yeah.
level
Right.
that would cause people to line up or come from around the world. And they would applaud, and because it was so wacky an idea to them, I think they thought, yeah, we can applaud that because that's probably never going to
Because it'll
happen
never happen.
in
Right.
that size of town.
Right.
Well, the story goes then, years passed, and that's where I I began to go downhill because small towns operate different than I was used to, and they'd already. I'll just use the term everybody uses. They already ran off one preacher, two preachers, two of them, over the before I got there. No, one before I got there, and then another one after I got there.
Just
And
small town
so
politics kind of thing.
yeah, because
Okay.
what they did is, and they didn't like me from the beginning because they came in and built some nice apartments that were affordable, and the people who owned houses in the town said, "Well, everybody's going to live in those. Now, how am I going to rent my house out?" So they kind of didn't like me from the beginning because I supported and helped bring that housing in.
Yeah.
And you know what? They didn't lose a thing. It was fine.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
anyway, sort of started on the wrong foot. And so, they just little towns, they just started saying stuff and doing stuff and that. None of it was
Gossip.
true, and my
Yeah.
daughter going to high school was in the school there, and she'd hear all this stuff. And I mean, it was ridiculous. Like, don't go to that church because he locks the door once you get in. You can't get out until he's done.
My goodness.
Yeah, and then they said he signs their tithe checks. They bring their checks forward and he signs them, and just stuff like that.
My goodness.
And I
Crazy.
think, yeah, and you know what? People will believe dumb stuff.
Sure.
But anyway, it got worse and worse to where they started insinuating other things about my daughter's life, which she was great, and our life, which it was great, but just insinuating that there were secrets, and you don't know these people like I do. Like, so anyway, it
Mm.
was at that point I thought, I've been here. I took this little church because we're going to do something, God. And here, all I hear is this junk. And fortunately, like I said, the church was fine. They were great to us and
How many
everything.
years had gone by this point?
Well, 12. I gave
Oh
12 years to
man.
that little town with the
Wow.
idea that God's going to do something. And that's a long time. And
That is a
I'm
long
going
time.
down. And
Yeah.
and so Kathy's like, she's getting like, I'm slowing down. I'm not myself anymore, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm trying to preach, but it just wasn't quite there. And
Yeah.
she said, finally, Kathy said, Steve, you've got to do something. Something's got to give here.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when I began to realize, I got to do something. So March of that year, it was 1996. March of that year, I got up on that Sunday, one Sunday, and I said, said everything and said, listen, I'm like the woman with the issue of blood. She had an issue of blood for 12 years. I said, I've been here like her. I've been pastor here for 12 years. I've given all that I have, and still I'm no better. And I walked out. I left.
Wow. That was bold.
Yes.
Oh
I, I like to be bold. I like to be
yeah, I can see that.
So I walked out, and Kathy didn't know exactly what I didn't know at the time that she was wondering, are we going to stay married even? That didn't even cross my
Wow.
mind, but it did
Sure.
hers. Well,
Yeah.
she stayed and kept the church going because they thought I went on sabbatical. He's gone to seek God. He heard something's going on in Florida. He's going to go down and check out that move of God. And
Oh,
so
you
it
can
was
just
very
imagine the
positive.
rumors.
Yeah, and so
Flying-
the church thought this is very positive, but to me it was, I have to go. I'm going to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I know I am, and I did, and I quit eating. I quit talking. I went to Florida, and I spent 2 weeks down there, and I prayed and screamed into a pillow, and like there's a crazy man. I wouldn't let housekeeping in because I just couldn't see anybody, and so about a week later, after all that praying and going to a great church there in Florida, uh, I started getting a little hope back, and I started thinking a little bit like a pastor again. So after another week of going through that, I felt like the Lord began to impress upon me, and I started hearing this. I thought it was crazy, but I heard again after those 12 years, it was that same type of voice that I taught, when we heard about raising the dead. And I heard this: I want you to have a revival. And I'm sitting in this church in the balcony, just away from everybody. I didn't want to sit by anybody. And I heard, I want you to have a revival. And I thought it was a psychological game. All hope is lost. I have no no direction in my life, and I'm hearing things. That's what I thought.
Wow.
And so, but I went the next night and I sat in church because they were having nightly services, and I heard it again.
Mhm.
And I still put it out. I thought, you're crazy. Then the third night I went, I heard it again. I still sat in the balcony by myself, away from everyone. And I heard a correction that said, I didn't say you had to be a revival.
Oh, that's so good.
I'm saying, would you have one? And I saw this part was me. My application of it was, I like a waiter going through this big party saying, hors d'oeuvres, would you care for a
Uh-huh.
drink? Something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, I thought, well, maybe I could do that. I don't know what that means. So I
Right.
called Kathy. I said, I'm coming home. But I said, if nothing happens, nothing changes, please. I'm not going to pull myself up by the bootstraps and start over. Okay.
Yeah.
And she didn't, I don't know what she thought was, but anyway, went home and I drove in, parked the car in the same parking space I'd done for 12 years. Felt absolutely nothing. Nothing was going on. I walked in the door. It was a Sunday evening service, and I heard the music. It's going, and worship is going, and I'm stood, getting ready to go through that door. Nothing. So I didn't know what to do. So I just walked in. Everybody turns and looks at me. What are you? Who? Oh, you're back. And the only person I really spotted was Kathy, about 10 feet away, whatever. And I thought, what do I do? Give your wife a hug. You've been gone for 2 weeks. Show what a great husband you are. That's what went through my head. And
Yeah.
so I walked towards her. I took about 8 steps or whatever, and I reached out, just like I said I was going to do, and never got to give her that hug. I reached out, and it was like, I mean, this is a world historical moment that people write about. It was like a lightning bolt from heaven came through the roof and hit me. It was like lightning and a little bit of thunder, but mostly it was like being electrocuted by God.
Uh-huh.
And the closest I can compare, like a couple of times when I was a kid fooling around, I stuck my finger in a light socket, and it's a pain that is like no other pain, and it's a feeling like no other feeling. It's not like you got cut or smacked or hit.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
that's all. It just electrified me, and after not speaking and so beaten down, I started leaping. They said I twirled. I'm in denial, but I'm not a twirler, but I'm in denial. But anyway, I became a different person
Wow.
right on the spot. I mean, I have my relatives just happened, my sisters and brother-in-laws and my brother and his wife, they just happened to be there that night too, and they know me and my wife and my kid, and I became another person. And I was stunned. I was so stunned by it. I was almost like a man that had been had a stroke, because I got up and tried to say something, and I go, and all of a sudden, drip. I couldn't. I just lost my speech for a little bit, and that went on for about 2 weeks, in and out. It got bad. It got less as
Sure.
time went on,
Yeah.
but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what it was, and but I did go over the piano, since I'm a musician too. But I had quit singing and playing the piano because I wasn't with it. And I sang for the first time, picked out a song, just sang a worship song or whatever. And I didn't know what it was. I noticed I went over, and this couple that was there from the very beginning. They just came up for prayer, like they were feeling God or something. And I didn't even I didn't touch them or anything. And they just fell to the ground. And it wasn't like timber fall. It was like their
Sure.
knees got cut off, and they just went down
Yeah.
in a kind of a kneeling position, but they just went
Right.
down. And I
Yeah.
and I didn't touch them or anything. And I thought, what is this?
Uh-huh.
So I don't want to make this story too long, but I didn't know what it was, and that's exactly what I said. I said, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to come back tomorrow night and find out. That's all I said. I didn't say we're having church. And when I showed up, the place was full of people. About 150 people showed up, or maybe more. And we kind of went through that awkwardness again, and prayed for a couple of people who I knew well, and they were getting stirred, and all the people that wanted to do now was come to church and figure out what this is. So we started going a number of days, Sunday through Wednesday or Thursday, and then I said, let's take the weekend off and see if we come back Sunday and this is still here, then whatever this is, then we're gonna have to deal with it. We came back and it was there. So we did that for 7 weeks, just kind of as a local church. And
Mhm.
around that time, some people started visiting, and I grew up actually I was on staff at a Methodist church for a year. I kind of left that out in the story before I went into the full-time ministry,
Yeah.
and uh, so I knew Methodists pretty well. And this row of Methodists came in and sat down, and they were pretty much Methodists, but that
Mhm.
was all right. But at the end, one of them said, I think I'd like prayer, but they wouldn't come down to the front, but they'd stay in their pew.
Right.
And the thought in my mind after 7 weeks is that if God can do something with these Methodists, I'll know for sure we're into something here. Maybe that wasn't right to do, but I thought that they
Yeah.
had a marvelous. It was a great prayer time, and they ended up, they flopped down in the pew. So at that point we switched, and my daughter got married in that room while we switched and moved to the gymnasium, and I switched the services from Wednesday to Sunday, thinking, will my own congregation come on the weekends because I didn't want a church of visitors every week. I wanted our
Right.
church to be the
Right.
host. I wanted it to be our church, and then we're hosting other. So
Mhm.
that's what happened. They did. They all kids came. Our kids came. People gave up sports and soccer and stuff to come, and we had 5 services a week for 3.5 years. And we would our people too would they
Yeah.
show up at 6 because there was preparation, and we'd show up, and then maybe some of them went earlier, but I had to stay till midnight at least,
Mhm.
sometimes 1 o'clock, and so then people started coming, and it grew and grew and grew. And Newsweek came, Time magazine came,
Wow.
uh, Wall Street Journal came, St. Louis Chronicle came, no, St. Louis Post Dispatch came, San Francisco Chronicle came, and so just like that, there began to be reporters there
Right.
because uh, there would be 1,000 there'd be 1,000 people on our property, and only 500 in the town every day for 5 days, and we had to host it. No gas station, no grocery store.
Oh, wow.
We had a little bank,
Yeah.
old-fashioned farmers bank. I think that was it. I was going to say, and what else? There was some kind of little store thing where they worked on cars or something. That was it. You couldn't buy gas. People would run out of gas after on the highway. So we had a gasoline ministry. A guy with a truck went out afterwards and found people who had run out of gas and or water. We passed out water. But sure enough, anyway, there was a documentary made then called "Go Inside the Smithton Outpouring," and on it you can see, sure enough, there they are. They're lined up. I mean, lined up in the middle of the day, just
Yeah.
standing there, just to get because they wanted to get in, and
Wow.
that was so that went on for 3.5 years, and then and Kathy and I then, of course, we got invitations to travel all over the world. So when Newsweek, funny story, when Newsweek came out, I was walking through the airport in Paris. I was in Paris with Kathy, and we're walking through is it Charles de Gaulle airport? And I'm walking, and there's people all over the airport with Newsweek magazine open in French, and
Right.
I could see
Wow.
our church pictures, but I just didn't have the nerve to say.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
thinking
us.
like, how do you say that's me? Let's see, c'est moi, it's me. But I didn't have the nerve to do it.
Sure.
But that's what our lives did. And all of a sudden, when you're in those, everything changed. So I went from over the 12 years, I went from fairly decent ministry to complete obscurity, and really didn't have any friends or anything because just you get into some small churches, unfortunately, as important as they are, and they seem insignificant sometimes to our country or to the people that go there. And so people just lost interest in things, and nobody wanted to hear me really other than our own church. And then instantly over months, just from obscurity to national to international. And we
Mhm.
traveled about every other week, flew somewhere, and then got back. We came back quick enough, and we do services all day there and come back. So that went on. So in the year 2000, then the town couldn't handle us anymore. There was some people that they were tired. I
Oh,
mean, they
yeah.
didn't go to our church. They were just tired of the crowds,
Right.
door slamming, and they called the police on us a lot, because there were so many people, and they didn't
Wow.
like where people just came to town and parked their car, and busloads of people from around the world would come from Korea and Singapore and Japan, and I didn't know they were coming. I had no idea, and so they wrote that. So Charisma Magazine did a lot of articles and others, and one article they wrote was "Revival in the Middle of Nowhere."
Yeah.
They did the other. They called it the Cornfield Revival. Was the Smithton Outpouring, Cornfield Revival, and Revival in the Middle of Nowhere were titles
Right.
that
Yeah.
people gave. So I flew to Japan, and I'd been there before, and now they kind of knew me. And they had a big 2,000-seat arena or something downtown, and so they put posters up all over. And the Japanese, they like their posters to be really lively and lots of color, and they had all this flashing stuff on there. And then I looked at it, and there was my picture real big on it. And but there was a uh, they didn't know what, and they put on it, they didn't know what to say, the translation. So it said, "Come here, the man from nowhere." And so, but they did come. And so we moved to Kansas City then in 2000 and
Okay.
started this journey. And the revival continued even in Kansas City through trying to get buildings and stuff. But we eventually bought some property, and because people were still coming, we put up 1,000-seat tent on the property because we didn't have a building on it, and we're going to build. And then 9/11 happened, and when that happened, everybody quit traveling, and so it was just
That was
time to,
kind of like it.
yeah. And now it's time to, I thought, now we're going to be a local church. And we built buildings, three big buildings, and did things. And then, as you mentioned in the bio, that in 2008, I had another surprise. There was no warning there either. I just was trying to get us going a little more and deeper in worship because we knew what it was way back, and we weren't trying to copy that again. But it just wasn't on the level I thought, and I kept trying to coach musicians and stuff. And finally, the Lord was just impressed me. Just get up with the microphone yourself and coach everybody. Just do it in church, not after church. And I did. And that night, it was a Friday or Saturday night. I don't know, Friday night, I guess because we had some Friday night services for people who worked on Sunday, and it worked well. And it just, something started again. And I didn't know what. And after about 2 weeks, our people were saying, there's something here. And so they asked if we could add Saturday back so we could go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so people again from out of town could come. So we ended up doing 4 services a week. But then I had a book that I never intended many Christians to read. It's called My Absurd Religion, by which I make my living. It's kind of small like this. Well, it's bigger. No, it's 3 times the size of that, but it's a little bit smaller.
Okay.
And but it was, Kathy and I had a television show that was syndicated that was like sort of like a Christian late night thing. And it was syndicated late night at 10 o'clock on Sunday nights all over the country, different cities. And so I kind of wrote it for that crowd who probably didn't go to church, but probably used to go to church or might go to church.
Right.
And why don't you go to church? So I wrote My Absurd Religion, explaining, I get you. That's what the book, like, I get you, man. But it did accidentally get published and put in bookstores. And so
Accidentally?
yes. And I got a phone call then from the publisher, said, we don't know what to do. Said that they're angry in the bookstores, these people and these pastors. I said, what? They say you're preaching against everything they do. And so he said, what do we do? What do I do? What do I do? I said, I don't care. Just box them up and send them back. I never wanted them to be there in the first place. So anyway, because of that book, I got invited. I'd been before, but to the Daystar Network, and I was a guest, and we were talking about this book. And then we were done, and they ran some kind of ad or something. And while we're sitting there, they whispered to Marcus Lamb, who was living then, saying, we got a few extra minutes. What do you want to do? And a visit? And he thought, oh, he heard that one of their staff who had been in Kansas City had taken a video of the prayer time. And it was like 3 minutes long, and they showed it to their prayer center there, just to inspire them, and they'd shown it that morning. And so they said, hey, why don't we show that video? I heard it was really good, and I'm not even sure I'd seen it at the time, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so they did. They grabbed it, and they just played it. It's 3 minutes long. And at the end of it, Marcus said, he just looked, and he said, I want to capture that. I'm going to send a truck to your church, satellite dish. The huge big ones they still have, I guess, on a big truck. I'm going to send that there, and we'd like you to do 90 minutes live every Friday night, live TV, and which was like live. And I'm praying for people, what's going to happen? What is that? But I said, okay. So we started, and we just were going to go maybe a couple months or something is what I think they were thinking, through the holidays too. And it started, and that lasted. So we ended up doing, we prayed on Wednesday, corporate prayer, and then we'd have service Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And now all of a sudden, so we did it, and now we're live in 200 countries for whatever time period I didn't know. And so we just did it, and we did that for over 3 years.
Yeah.
4 services a week for over 3 years.
Yeah.
And so then Kathy and I traveled to the impact of all these countries. And it had a bigger impact, I think, in other parts of the world, because a lot of them didn't have Toronto, or they never heard of this revival, never heard of that. And so we were doing that. And so that's a lot of services. And I preached them all. I preached every one of them, because I found out that if I gave it to somebody else, sometimes their religion and ideas and that, and I'm a pretty free person. I don't worry in the service much about what if somebody says something they shouldn't say or do something. It's okay, because moves of God need to be pastored, and that's the biggest thing I would say about the mistakes that I saw in history and during those periods of time. Other times in history, you can read about moves of God and see they started good and everything, but then the leadership either let down or other people got in, and people ruined it. It's not
Mm.
really that God stopped, but and so I learned. I said, so I'm going to pastor this, and so from the beginning to the end of the service, I watched over and cared. I didn't do everything. I didn't pray for everybody all the time. I did pray for a lot of
It's just
thousands of people through
leadership.
time,
Yeah,
leadership,
right.
and it was like visitors would come from all over the world, and you get some weird ones and strange people. But it's like they looked and thought, "There's no opening here. These people know what they're doing. They've been doing this." And some of the same people in Kansas City are the same ones that were in Smithton. But then
Mhm.
we also had a whole new crowd too. And so these people know what they're doing, and you just get on the property, and um,
Mhm.
there's so, like I said, there's, you have to be careful. I have to be careful because I don't want to downplay the good things that are happening now and the trying and attempting. The only thing I might say is to be slightly careful with labeling it too fast, because I know I didn't want to label ours too fast,
Mhm.
because it gives the people the idea, okay, been there, done that.
Mhm.
It's almost like you go and you witness to somebody outside of a bar or whatever, and they're drunk or whatever, and they pray, and you get them to pray the prayer of salvation and all that, and then they still walk off to their car to drive home drunk, and you go like, but did we? Now this person might have a been there, done that, and now they think I'm in heaven. If I die, I'll go to heaven. Nothing left
Right.
because that's what you told me. Would I go to heaven if I die?
It's
And
like
so
you've been
they're yeah,
inoculated.
so they're not gonna follow through with what the
Right.
purpose of it was. The
Right.
purpose was is to get you into the kingdom of God and active to glorify God and to give your life over to that. But
Right.
and so I want to be careful of that. I think what we're experiencing more in this day and age is leaning a lot more to what I would call a great awakening. Because I
Mhm.
got a note from somebody who said, we're having great services. People are getting saved and baptized. I thought, okay, that's awakening. A
Mhm.
revival is for the people of God.
Mhm.
It's we labeled it, it's like bringing life back to the half dead. They're
Mhm.
not dead, but
Yes.
half of them is no longer. And now what they thought their life would be is not. They're disappointed.
Sure.
It didn't work out. They still go to church, but it's like I'm going through the motions. And
Mhm.
there's millions of people like that, but
Like
we don't.
Laodicea.
Yeah, and we don't address. Yes, absolutely, and we don't address it much anymore. We some, hardline old Pentecostal churches, they really try really hard, but in the more of the other that we've created kind of a commercialized Jesus that
Yeah.
is more concerned with my feelings than with my
Right.
spirit,
Right.
and so feelings is everything. The worst in our culture right now, the worst thing you can do is hurt somebody's feelings.
Yeah, I know.
That's who they hurt my feelings. Oh, you poor thing. You poor thing. Let
Mhm.
me make you feel better. So we go to church to feel better
Mhm.
about who we are and what we are rather than to be transformed. I
Mhm.
know I became, and my family knows, I became a different person.
Mhm.
Sorry, I did.
Yeah.
And now I know it's possible.
Mhm.
And I know because that's what happened to Paul or Saul Paul. He
Yep.
was a persecutor. He was on his way to maybe even have people murdered, maybe, but in jail for sure. And he walks away and he's going to be the preacher now. That's a transformation that I had never experienced that level. And so my message then, as that is, we we must get back to, if we're spiritually sick, we're never going to get well.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, and and so we need. That's why I asked you before that you're a doctor. You know how important it is to get a proper diagnosis.
Mhm.
Or in my book, Mighty Like Gideon, I think it's a true assessment was the title of it. That we've got a wrong diagnosis, and
Mhm.
we think the cure is I need more of me. The cure is I need more love at me. The cure is I need to surround myself with more comforts, because
Yeah.
that's I'm going to build this around me, because that's the problem. The problem is I don't think highly enough of myself. I have low self-esteem,
Mhm.
and so we're getting. It's like we've gone to the doctor and got a wrong diagnosis, and now we're being treated. Trying to make us well, but it's not making us well, as you know, and then it spills over, as you know, into every area of our life, relationships. Um, I was talking to you right before too. Like I had to tell myself I had to fall out of love with food,
Mhm.
but it's just like, why was I eating then? Because there was something else. I'm replacing food with something else for
Oh,
what I need
yeah.
somewhere else.
Right.
So so right now in our country, I want to see that next part. I think so many of the other colleagues and pastors that are doing good things, I'm trying to convince them that we need to move away from that, what I call the commercialized Jesus. Or actually, I think we've invented, we don't feel like we have idols, like other places, but I think we do, because we create a God in our own image.
Mhm.
Because if you'll notice, general society can tell you what God likes, and
Mhm.
they can tell you what Jesus would do, and they would tell you, well, Jesus would never allow that law to be passed.
Right.
What? Because we've created him, that a God that likes everything I like
Right.
and is comfortable with me. And
Mhm.
now I'm comfortable with me because God's comfortable with me. And now I expect you to get comfortable with me,
Mhm.
and now we have conflict because maybe I'm not going to be comfortable with some of
Right.
the things you're doing as an adult or a child or whatever.
Sure.
And so that's basically what I'm saying. If we could get a proper diagnosis from the pulpits and churches and worship and all that, to realize that what the symptoms we're showing are a sickness,
Mhm.
but we're smart people, we're a prosperous country, we can cover it up and do other things and buy stuff, but the actual feelings that we have inside need to be cured. And that's why church folks need revival,
Mhm.
because they're living it and they're believing in God, but they're half dead.
Right.
One, should I keep going? I'm still
Well,
talking.
yeah.
I was
So,
going to just mention just
yeah.
one, the story a lot of people know, the Good Samaritan.
Mhm.
We focus on the Good Samaritan because he was what he did, but
Right.
what we don't focus in is what happened to who did he help? He helped a Jewish man that
Mhm.
was totally beat up
Right.
and left half dead.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's it.
Yeah.
And
And
but he got help. And
right.
help came,
Absolutely.
and it didn't come from the priest, and it didn't come from the Levite. It came from a place and a person he would have never expected.
Right.
There.
Absolutely.
Now I'll take a breath. Sorry.
All right, no, that's great. So there's a couple of things that struck me as you were telling your story about the fact that you were faithful to what God told you. And for 12 years, nothing happened. And then you came to the end of yourself. And then at that point, where there was this complete surrender of, I can't manufacture this. This is not something that I can do. You walked back in obedience with the recognition of He has to show up, He has to make it happen. And then everything kind of shifted. But
Yeah.
now it sounds like what you're describing, like I keep coming back to the Church of Laodicea in
Mhm.
Revelation, where it sounds so much, and I've been thinking for years that so much of the Christian church is Laodicea. They're half
Mhm.
dead, as you're describing. And this idea of, I want you to be either hot or cold, pick one, but it needs to be something that
Yep.
is completely genuine, and it needs to be from Him.
Yep.
Invite Him in and allow Him to come in and create revival the way that He wants to, not the way that we think it should be. So that's
Strong,
kind
yeah,
of
strong, great thoughts, because you're absolutely right. I took what I thought God wanted me to do with the idea of what I thought revival was. And I had to study it and figure it out,
right.
in
Sure.
my head. I didn't know exactly, because I hadn't experienced what
Right.
generations had before.
Mhm.
But here's the deal that's probably going to be the thing that's going to be the most challenging. Because, for instance, for leaders, and I would, you're a leader. You wouldn't be doing this if you weren't a leader. You're leading. So it's not just a preacher and a pulpit leader, but leaders who want to know God and want to move forward and can influence other people.
Mhm.
I had to come to I came to a conclusion
Mhm.
that I'm talking revival, move of God, and I would even read revival history of when
Right.
God swept through and the people just collapsed, and it was like overwhelming, and it was like, what? And all these things were happening. And I would read those accounts, and it would stir people, and it would stir me. What I didn't know is, if I'm going to really be a leader or be effective at what God really wants to do, I really, I'm not ready. I think most leaders look and say, my church would never go for this. I've had thousands of pastors tell, well, this is nice for you, but I don't think my church would go for this, or maybe they wouldn't go for it.
Right.
And I'm realizing that is not the problem. I think churches would. The problem is, I wasn't ready for what I was saying I wanted to happen and do. I
Yeah.
had to go on a journey. And
Right.
so right the season before it happened, we basically nobody heard me preach except my own church like that.
Mhm.
And then what happened that even just weeks later, but months later, they're giving 10,000 sermons are going out a week, I think. Well, it started a month and then a week. And we were on Daystar, they got 5,000 and 6,000 calls in one night to their call center, which started out with 200.
Mhm.
And they thought that was most TV shows would think if 200 people called, that would be a hit. And I
Mhm.
didn't even know. Then their engineer, they sent an engineer up to us every week, said it shut down the call center down there because that. Well, what happened? Did the people all of a sudden wake up and said, I got a revelation. I need revival. I'm going to get. No, something happened to me. And when it happened to me, I was able to say what I
Yeah.
needed to say and be what I needed to be. So then they could say, I want that. I don't
Right.
want to hear about
Yeah.
this just in my head. I'll imagine in my head what it's like. I
Mhm.
see you, I see these people, and they come all this time. And I probably had another 1,000 pastors come and say, after being in these services, I don't even know if I'm saved. I
Mhm.
bet there was 1,000 told me that because they saw the children worshiping with such intensity. No coloring books, nothing like that. They're not no playing on the phones. And teenagers come every single service, and they run up to the front. And then I did. You can watch videos, but like our place, it'd be 1,200 people in the building, and I'd say, if you want what I just was preaching about, if you want it, come now. And I am not kidding. It was a stampede.
Uh-huh.
There'd be two or 300 at least run. They'd climb over pews, they'd climb over wheelchairs,
Yeah.
they'd run and they would dive. They're crying, they're weeping, they're shouting, they don't know what to do with themselves,
Right.
and they would dive. And it certainly wasn't line people up and pray for them. There's no way.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just exploded.
Right.
And most of the healings that took place, physical healings that took place, actually took place not laying hands on people. It just
Just fell
started
on that.
flowing through. And
Yeah.
sometimes it'd be during worship. And I would tell the worship leader, I think God's going to, so
Right.
get ready. And I would just call it out. People would run down. I I couldn't pray for all of them fast enough.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was like instead of thinking of like a single shot, because I notice people really like it if you stand in front of them and pray, and the person that's maybe 3 inches away
Right.
receives nothing.
Hmm.
They just wait their turn because we're good Greek people, Greek-minded people.
Sure.
You got to wait your turn.
Right.
But
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Hebrew mind, God called the whole nation together, and they're all
Right.
standing there, and they all
They all
experienced.
got it at the
Uh,
same
and
time.
and so that is foreign to us. It's
Right.
tough. Corporate is tough. We want individualism,
Hmm.
and we want to have. I want God to come to my room at 12:30 tonight and tell me what I'm supposed to do. I don't
Yeah.
want to have to go to church and. But anyway, so
Yeah.
we're very corporate-minded people. Family, the church, the Bible was written to be read to a group, not an individual. So
Right.
I encourage people to find that church and place where
Yeah.
people are really hungry for God. Doesn't matter if they're there, but do they if they have in the book I mentioned that, are you thirsty? Because Gideon took them down to the river first, and it was at the river that decided who they were going to be, at the river.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
wasn't if, get this, it wasn't if you drank,
Hmm.
because 10,000 men drank.
It was how
It
they.
was how you, yes, it was how
Mhm.
you drank.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so God watches how
Hmm.
we drink. And
Hmm.
300 got picked by the way they
Hmm.
drank. And that's a kind of another story on interesting things on that. But nevertheless, I began and would teach that. And I think, look at yourself. You think, well, it's just church again. But you're the one that can turn this.
Hmm. Hmm.
Even if you don't, well, I'm no pastor. It doesn't matter. You're the one that can turn this. But you need to get this. If you want to fulfill whatever you say, your destiny or your future or whatever the reason you were born,
Hmm.
if you get it, other people will get it too because they'll say, I want that. I need to see it. And so really we don't really need as many good sermons as we need good examples, I think.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. That's absolutely
good
true.
churches, but we need good examples
Right.
of somebody that said this is so worth it.
Hmm.
Like you mentioned, we've been married 50 years and uh, there is a level in my life now that's better than it's ever been in my life, and I'm old enough I could retire if I wanted to, but uh, it's just so good that I didn't know it could be this good. I thought I thought as a younger generation, if you get old, everything's lost. But there's a goodness to life that is just really wonderful at this time of my life. And I love Jesus and the things he does more than ever in my whole life. And I have a deeper relationship with him ever in my whole life. I'm not tired. I'm not burned out. And I've done a lot and I'm not burned
Yeah, it
out
sounds
because
like
I,
you
I
have.
always, I just want to go. I just want to be with him. That's it though. I just want to be with him. I don't have to preach. I don't have to sing. I don't have to be a somebody if I
Mhm.
can have you. Now, if I can have you and be influence other
Mhm.
people and do that,
Okay.
that I'll do that. But
Sure.
I don't want to go. I don't want to do it without him. So I spend a lot of time
Priorities.
just, yeah, a lot of prayer time. Most of my prayer time is not asking for anything except
Hmm.
him.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then if I have a need or somebody has a need, I tag it on the end. But I've
Hmm.
spent more time with him. Now, could I just
Right.
mention this to you? You
Hmm.
know,
Right. And
but
it's
we like
like,
our prayer is business first. And
mhm,
then now I got to go do something else, because
that's
I need this breakthrough and, I need finances or whatever. So we do it and then we're
the
off. And
American.
I flip it around. The Hebrew culture and Eastern cultures do it differently. They have this extended relationship time. And then at the end, you could I ask a favor,
Mhm.
and
Sure. Yeah.
that's how I do it
Absolutely.
anyway.
Right. And it's very Matthew, I think it's 6, where he talks about, if you seek first the kingdom of God, all of these things will be added to you. And there's that
Absolutely.
start out with that idea of faith and trust, then you can just tack it on. Sometimes you don't even have to. He's going to take care of it. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's one of my favorite scriptures, by the way, is that I've lived by. If I put it
Yeah.
first, and I tell you, you can get things. God will give you things if you do that, or you can work for it, and
Right.
then you'll still have the things. But
Sure.
there's two
Yeah.
ways you can get them.
Right.
Yeah.
Amen. Where can people go to learn more about you and to get your books?
Okay. Just real easy.
Mhm.
SteveGrayMinistries.com, and this was free. It was a free download, but I think you got to buy it now. I'm not sure, but anyway, you it's short enough you can read it in an hour or so, and it will talk about America and all that.
Mhm.
And revival and all that. And then Mighty Like Gideon. There we go.
Yeah.
That one you can get. And then if you get it through us, I should say, by the way, I wrote this with my son-in-law,
Oh,
J.D.
that's
King.
great.
He's a
Very cool.
prolific writer. He's got lots of books.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and I just pick and choose, but we were actually asked to write this book together, and we did. And so he made great study guide, a workbook, I should say. There it is, Mighty Like Gideon. And I think it's like if you get the book through us, you can get this like for $1, and
Mhm.
it's really good workbook. And so you can get anywhere you want in the bookstore or whatever, but you can also go to stevegrayministries.com and get it.
Awesome. Well, I will link to that in the show notes. And thank you, Steve. This has been very inspiring. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
good. I hope so.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.